My son took me to a lawyer to handle the will documents. While he went to the bathroom, the lawyer grabbed my mother by the arm and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, did you know you're listed as missing? Please," he added. "Do not act scared. Just listen. You are not safe with him. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from." The morning my son Dylan called to say he'd arranged a meeting with his lawyer, I was standing in my kitchen watching cardinals fight over the feeder outside my window. I remember thinking how territorial they were, how desperate to claim what they believed was theirs. If I'd known then what that thought would come to mean, I might have packed a bag and disappeared into the Vermont hills that very moment. But I didn't. I was simply grateful that my son was finally taking an interest in practical matters. At 63, I'd been managing my late husband's estate alone for 2 years, and the paperwork had become overwhelming. Gerald had always handled the finances, the properties, the investments. When the stroke took him suddenly on a Tuesday morning in March, he left me with a paid-off farmhouse, 3 rental properties in Burlington, a considerable investment portfolio, and absolutely no idea how any of it worked. "Mom, you need professional help with this," Dylan had said over Sunday dinner the week before. "You can't just keep stuffing papers in drawers and hoping for the best." He wasn't wrong. The dining room table had become a landscape of unopened envelopes, legal documents with sticky notes saying, "Read this," and statements from accounts I didn't remember Gerald ever mentioning. My daughter-in-law, Patricia, had made several pointed comments about getting things in order and making sure everything's documented properly. At the time, I'd thought she was being helpful. "The lawyer's name is Marcus Whitfield," Dylan told me on the phone that Tuesday morning. "He's been handling some business matters for me, and he's excellent with estate planning. I've already explained your situation. Can you meet us Thursday at 10? "Us?" I asked, cradling the phone against my shoulder while I poured coffee. "I'll drive you, Mom. Some of this stuff is complicated. It'll be good for me to understand it, too." Something in his voice made me pause. It was too careful, too rehearsed. But I pushed the feeling aside. Dylan was my only child, the center of my world after Gerald died. He worked in commercial real estate in Boston, made good money, had given me 2 beautiful grandchildren. If he wanted to help his aging mother navigate the legal complexities of widowhood, I should be grateful. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart," I said. "I'll be ready." Thursday morning arrived cold and bright. October in Vermont means the mountains catch fire with color, and even my worry about the meeting couldn't dim my appreciation for the beauty. Dylan picked me up at 9:30, driving the new BMW he'd purchased last spring. Patricia waved from the passenger seat but didn't get out. "I'm just dropping Dylan off after," she explained through the lowered window, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I have a hair appointment at 11:30. The law office was in a converted Victorian on Main Street in Montpelier, the kind of building that whispered old money and quiet power. Marcus Whitfield's name was on a brass plaque beside 2 others. Dylan held my elbow as we climbed the stairs, which I found both touching and slightly irritating. I'd hiked 5 miles just last week. The reception area smelled of leather and lemon polish. A young woman with severe glasses took our coats and led us down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men in dated suits. Whitfield's office was at the end, a corner room with tall windows overlooking the street. The lawyer himself was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that came from expensive haircuts and regular gym sessions. He stood when we entered, extending his hand first to Dylan, then to me. "Mrs. Mosley Braun, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." He gestured to 2 leather chairs facing his massive desk. Dylan sat immediately, but I took a moment to notice the details of the room. 3 filing cabinets against 1 wall, a closed door that probably led to a conference room or record storage, a laptop open on the desk, its screen angled away from me. "I've asked Dylan to bring some documents today," Whitfield began, settling into his chair with practiced ease. "Title deeds, insurance policies, your husband's will, anything related to the estate. We need to ensure everything is properly registered and that there are no gaps in the chain of ownership." "I have most of it here," Dylan said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Mom had these in various places around the house. I've been helping her organize." I turned to look at my son. When did you— I don't remember giving you those papers. Last month, Mom. You said I could take them to make copies, remember? I didn't remember. But then, I'd been forgetting small things lately. Where I put my reading glasses. Whether I'd taken my blood pressure medication. The memory gaps frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Of course, I said quietly. Whitfield opened the folder and began spreading documents across his desk. I recognized Gerald's will, the deed to our farmhouse, insurance policies. But there were other papers too, forms I'd never seen before, bearing my signature at the bottom. What are those? I asked, leaning forward. Just administrative updates, Whitfield said smoothly. Power of attorney documents primarily. Very standard for estate planning. I don't recall signing any power of attorney. Dylan touched my arm. Mom, we talked about this, remember? You were worried about what would happen if you got sick, if you couldn't make decisions. You asked me to handle things if something happened to you. Had I said that? The words felt familiar but distant, like dialogue from a movie I'd half-watched while falling asleep. I wanted to argue, but Whitfield was already moving on, explaining something about property transfers and tax implications. The legal language washed over me like water, leaving me damp with confusion but no clearer about what was actually happening. If you'll excuse me, Dylan said suddenly, pulling out his phone. I need to take this call. Work emergency. He left the office, and I heard his voice in the hallway, tense and low. Whitfield continued shuffling papers, and I took the opportunity to really look at the man. His tie was expensive, his watch more so. The family portraits on his desk showed a pretty wife and 2 tow-headed children. Everything about him screamed success and respectability, which is why what happened next shocked me so completely. The moment Dylan's footsteps faded down the hallway, Whitfield's entire demeanor changed. He stood abruptly, walked to his office door, and closed it. Then he came around the desk, and before I could react, grabbed my arm and pulled me slightly from my chair. Mrs. Mosley Braun, he whispered urgently, his face inches from mine. Did you know you're listed as missing? I jerked back, my heart suddenly hammering. What? A missing person report was filed 3 weeks ago, September 15th. The Burlington Police Department has your photo, your description, everything. That's impossible. I'm not missing. I'm right here. I've been at home every day. I know that. His grip on my arm tightened. But someone filed the report, and that someone would have to be a family member to be taken seriously. The room tilted. I gripped the arm of my chair, trying to process what he was saying. Why would anyone, who would— The report was filed by your son. The words hit me like a physical blow. No, Dylan wouldn't. He's trying to help me. That's why we're here. Whitfield released my arm and stepped back, his face grave. Mrs. Mosley Braun, you need to listen very carefully. Those documents I just showed you, the ones with your signature, they transfer ownership of all your properties to Dylan Mosley Braun. The power of attorney gives him complete control over your finances. And the competency evaluation. What competency evaluation? There's a document here signed by a Dr. Patricia Mosley Braun stating that you've been experiencing severe memory loss, confusion, and possible early-stage dementia. It recommends that you be declared legally incompetent to manage your own affairs. My mouth went dry. Patricia. My daughter-in-law, Patricia, is a pediatrician. She has no authority to, and I've never been evaluated for. This is insane. I know. Whitfield glanced at the closed door. That's why I'm telling you this. Mrs. Mosley Braun, I think your son is trying to have you declared incompetent so he can take control of your estate. The missing person report is part of it. If you're found wandering, confused, after being reported missing, it strengthens the case that you can't care for yourself. I couldn't breathe. The office walls seemed to be closing in. But you're his lawyer. Why are you telling me this? Because I looked up the missing person report after Dylan first approached me. I wanted to verify the timeline he gave me about your husband's death and your supposed decline. When I saw that report, I knew something was very wrong. I'm an officer of the court, Mrs. Mosley Braun. I can't be party to fraud. Footsteps in the hallway. Dylan's voice, louder now, finishing his call. You have to go, Whitfield said quickly. But you need to understand. You're in danger. If you sign anything else, if you let this proceed, you'll lose everything. Your home, your independence, possibly even your freedom. He could have you placed in a care facility against your will. What should I— The door opened. Dylan stepped back inside, pocketing his phone. Sorry about that. Crisis averted. He smiled at me, and for the first time in my life, I looked at my son and saw a stranger. All set here? Dylan asked Whitfield. The lawyer had retreated behind his desk, his professional mask back in place. Just about. I need Mrs. Mosley Braun to initial a few more pages, and then we'll be done for today. Dylan returned to his seat beside me. Under the desk, where he couldn't see, Whitfield tapped the folder of documents twice, then shook his head almost imperceptibly. Don't sign. That's what he was telling me. Don't sign anything. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen Dylan was offering me. Every instinct screamed to run, to get out of that office and away from my son. But where would I go? What would I do? If what Whitfield said was true, Dylan had already begun the process of erasing me from my own life. I took the pen. My son smiled encouragingly. The lawyer watched me with carefully neutral eyes, and somewhere in the Burlington Police Department, my photo sat in a missing person file, waiting for the moment when I would conveniently disappear. The pen touched the paper. My signature started to form. And then I did something I hadn't done in 40 years of marriage and 32 years of motherhood. I said no. I need time to think about this, I said, setting down the pen. I want to take these documents home and review them. Dylan's smile froze. Mom, we talked about this. It's just a formality. Then another few days won't matter. I stood, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Mr. Whitfield, thank you for your time. I'll be in touch when I've had a chance to read everything thoroughly. I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Dylan's chair scrape back, heard him start to protest. But I was already in the hallway, moving toward the exit with my coat clutched in my hands, my heart racing, my mind spinning with one terrible, undeniable truth. My son had declared me missing while I slept in my own bed, and he'd brought me here today to make that lie become reality. The October sunshine felt like a mockery as I pushed through the building's front door. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, watching traffic pass. Patricia's BMW was parked half a block away, engine running. She saw me and waved. I didn't wave back, because suddenly I understood what the lawyer had been too professional to say outright. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about making me disappear. And I had just walked into the trap with my eyes wide open, trusting the son I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. The question now was simple and terrible. How do you escape from your own family when they've already begun erasing you from existence? I didn't get into Patricia's car. Instead, I told Dylan I needed fresh air and would take the bus home. The lie came surprisingly easily, smooth as river stones. He protested, of course, but Patricia had her hair appointment, and I could see him calculating whether pushing the issue would seem suspicious. Are you sure, Mom? His concern looked genuine. That terrified me more than anything. How long had he been practicing this performance? It's a long ride back to the house. I like the bus. Gives me time to think. I clutched my purse against my chest like a shield. Go on. Patricia's going to be late. I watched them drive away, then walked 3 blocks in the opposite direction before my legs finally gave out. I sat on a bench outside a coffee shop, shaking so hard my teeth chattered despite the mild October afternoon. An elderly man walking his dog asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine, just tired. Another lie. I was becoming good at those. When I could finally stand again, I went inside the coffee shop and ordered tea I didn't want just to have a reason to sit somewhere warm and public. I needed to think, to plan, but my mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. How had my son become someone who would do this to me? I pulled out my phone, the old flip phone Gerald had insisted I keep for emergencies, saying smartphones were too complicated for me to manage. At the time, I'd thought he was being overprotective. Now I wondered if it had been the first step in making me seem incompetent. No social media presence, no digital footprint. Easy to erase. I called the Burlington Police Department. I'd like to inquire about a missing person report, I told the officer who answered. For Elizabeth Mosley Braun. There was a pause, some keyboard clicking. Ma'am, are you calling with information about Mrs. Mosley Braun's whereabouts? I'm calling because I am Elizabeth Mosley Braun, and I'm not missing. Another pause, longer this time. Can you hold, please? I held for 7 minutes, watching my tea grow cold, watching people come and go with their normal problems and normal lives. When the officer returned, his voice had changed, grown careful in the same way Whitfield's had. Mrs. Mosley Braun, I'm going to transfer you to Detective Kathy Hines. Not Hines, I interrupted, then felt foolish. Sorry, yes. Transfer me. Detective Kathy Walsh came on the line. Mrs. Mosley Braun? Can you tell me where you are right now? Montpelier, downtown. I'm at a coffee shop called... I looked around for a name, found it on a menu board. Mountain Perks. And you're saying you're not missing? I've never been missing. I've been at my home in Burlington the entire time. I don't understand why there's a report at all. The report was filed by your son, Dylan Mosley Braun, on September 15th. He stated that you'd left your home on foot without your medication, that you'd been increasingly confused and disoriented, and that he was worried for your safety. September 15th. I pulled up the calendar app on my phone, the one feature I'd mastered. September 15th was a Friday. I'd spent that entire day at home, canning tomatoes from my garden. I had photographs on my camera to prove it. The old digital camera Gerald bought me years ago, the one I used because it was simpler than a phone. Detective Walsh, I was home all day on September 15th. I have photos with timestamps. I had a phone conversation with my friend Margaret that afternoon. She'd called to tell me about her grandson's acceptance to college. This is all some kind of mistake, or... I stopped, unwilling to say what I really thought over a recorded police line. Mrs. Mosley Braun, I'd like you to come to the station. Can you do that? I can send a car to pick you up. Something in her tone made me hesitate. She sounded professional, concerned, careful. Exactly the way someone would sound if they were trying to coax a confused elderly woman into custody for her own protection. Actually, I have another appointment, I said, but I'll come by tomorrow. What time works best? Mrs. Mosley Braun. Tomorrow, I repeated firmly, and ended the call before she could argue. My hands were shaking again. I'd just lied to a police detective. But what choice did I have? If I went to that station, would they believe me? Or would they see a confused 63-year-old woman who didn't even realize she'd been wandering, who was now paranoid and making accusations against her devoted son? I needed proof, hard evidence that I was competent, aware, and very deliberately being set up. The bus ride back to Burlington took 40 minutes and gave me time to construct a plan. First, I needed to secure the documents in my house. Anything Gerald had left me. Anything with my name on it. Second, I needed to document everything. My daily activities, my mental clarity, my complete awareness of what was happening. Third, and most difficult, I needed to understand exactly what Dylan had already done and what he planned to do next. The farmhouse looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, peaceful and familiar under the autumn sun. Gerald and I had bought it 35 years ago, when Dylan was just a baby. We'd painted the shutters ourselves, planted the apple trees that now shaded the back porch, turned the barn into a workshop where Gerald spent his retirement building furniture. Every inch of it held memories, and someone was trying to take it from me. I went straight to Gerald's office, a small room off the kitchen that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. The filing cabinet where he kept important papers was unlocked. I pulled open the drawer marked property and found it nearly empty. My heart dropped. The deeds should have been here, insurance policies, mortgage documents, though the mortgage had been paid off years ago. All of it, gone. Last month, I whispered to the empty room. Dylan said he took them to make copies. But he hadn't made copies. He'd taken the originals and shown them to a lawyer as part of his plan to steal my estate. I checked the other drawers. Bank statements, gone. Investment portfolios, gone. Gerald's will was still there, but it was useless without the supporting documents. Even his death certificate had been removed. I sat down hard in Gerald's leather chair, the one that still held the impression of his body after 2 years. This was worse than I'd thought. Dylan hadn't just filed a false police report. He'd been systematically removing evidence of my ownership for weeks, maybe months. How had I not noticed? But I knew how. I'd been grieving, lonely, grateful for any attention from my son and his family. When Dylan offered to help organize paperwork, I'd been relieved. When Patricia suggested I might want to see a doctor about my occasional forgetfulness, I'd thought she was being caring. Every step of the way, they'd made their theft look like concern. The phone rang, making me jump. The landline, not my cell. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Mom?" Dylan's voice, warm and worried. "You made it home okay? I've been concerned. You seemed upset at the lawyer's office." "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just tired. Listen, about those papers. Whitfield called me. He said you want to review everything before signing. That's totally fine, of course. But Mom, some of this stuff is time-sensitive. The property transfers need to be filed by the end of the month for tax purposes." "What property transfers?" A pause. "The ones we discussed, remember? Putting the rental properties in my name to protect them from potential estate taxes. We talked about this." "I don't remember that conversation." "Mom." His voice changed, grew softer, sadder. "This is what I've been worried about. The memory issues are getting worse. Patricia thinks you should really see a specialist. There's a geriatric psychiatrist in Boston, Dr. Raymond Fletcher. He's supposed to be excellent. I could make you an appointment." "I don't need a psychiatrist, Dylan. My memory is fine." "You just said you don't remember our conversation about the properties. That was less than 2 weeks ago. Had it been? Or was this another lie, another piece of the trap closing around me?" "Send me documentation of what we discussed," I said. "An email. Text messages, something to refresh my memory." Another pause, longer this time. "Sure, Mom, I'll look for that. But you know I usually call rather than text. You've always said you prefer talking to typing." "True, but convenient for someone building a case that I was incompetent. No paper trail, no electronic record. Just his word against my faulty memory." "I need to go," I said. "I have things to do." "Wait, Mom. Can Patricia and I come by this weekend? We could help you organize the rest of Gerald's things. The kids would love to see you. The grandchildren. Emma, 8, and Lucas, 5. I hadn't seen them in 3 weeks. Every time I'd invited them over, Patricia had an excuse. Dance recital, soccer tournament, birthday parties. Now I understood why. They were keeping the children away from me, probably telling them that Grandma was sick, that Grandma was confused. "This weekend isn't good," I said. "Mom!" I hung up. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely return the phone to its cradle. I had to move fast. If Dylan knew I was suspicious, he'd accelerate whatever plan he had in place. The missing person report could be activated at any moment. Someone could show up claiming I'd wandered off, that I needed immediate psychiatric evaluation, that I was a danger to myself. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the old photo albums from my closet. There, tucked behind pictures of Dylan's childhood, I found what I was looking for: the information for Gerald's safety deposit box at the First Vermont Bank. Gerald had shown it to me once, years ago, saying if anything ever happened to him, I should check there first. "Insurance," he'd said, "just in case." At the time, I thought he meant life insurance policies. Now I wondered if he'd meant something more. Gerald had been a careful man, meticulous about records. Had he sensed something wrong before he died? Had he left me a way to protect myself? The bank closed at 5. I had 40 minutes. I was halfway out the door when I saw it. A car parked across the street. Dark sedan, tinted windows. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat watching my house. My blood went cold. I stepped back from the door, heart pounding. How long had they been there? Since I got home? Or had they been watching me all day? I moved to the side window, peering out carefully. The car was still there, engine off. As I watched, the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Young, professional-looking, carrying a tablet. She walked up to my neighbor's house and rang the doorbell. I exhaled shakily. Just a salesperson. Or someone conducting a survey. Not everyone was part of a conspiracy against me. But maybe some were. I waited until she'd gone inside the neighbor's house, then slipped out my back door and through the gap in the hedge that Gerald had never gotten around to fixing. It let me out on the parallel street, where I could walk to the main road without being seen from my front yard. Paranoid? Perhaps. But Whitfield's warning kept echoing in my mind. You're in danger. The bank was a 10-minute walk. I made it with 5 minutes to spare. The young man at the customer service desk looked surprised when I asked to access my safety deposit box. Mrs. Mosley Braun, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you holding up? I recognized him now. Tyler Brennan, who'd grown up 3 houses down from me. He'd played with Dylan as a child. I'm managing, Tyler. Just need to check on some documents. Of course. I'll just need to see your ID and the key. I had both. The key had been in my jewelry box all along, a small brass thing I'd assumed was for a shed or storage unit. My hands shook as I handed it to Tyler. He led me back to the vault, a small room lined with metal boxes. Box 447, he said, then left me alone with whatever Gerald had deemed important enough to lock away. The box was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the small viewing room and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were stacks of papers, all neatly organized in labeled folders. Property deeds, copies of every property Gerald and I owned. Bank statements going back 10 years, investment records. And something else. A letter addressed to me in Gerald's handwriting. Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you're going to need protection. I've made some discoveries about our son that you need to know. My vision blurred with tears. Gerald had known. Somehow, before he died, he'd discovered what Dylan was planning. I kept reading, but the words swam on the page. Dylan had been borrowing money from Gerald for years, money for investments that never materialized. He was in debt, serious debt, to people Gerald had tried to investigate before his death. The properties, the estate. It was worth almost $3 million, more than enough to solve Dylan's problems. I confronted him, Gerald wrote. He denied everything, said I was getting paranoid in my old age. But Eleanor, I'm not paranoid. I'm careful. And I want you to be careful too. I've made copies of everything, stored them here where he can't reach them. If anything happens to me suddenly, if it looks like a heart attack or stroke, please, question it. Question everything. Don't trust anyone until you know the truth. The letter ended there. No signature, as if Gerald had been interrupted while writing it. Or as if he'd died before he could finish it. I looked at the date on the letter. March 3rd, 2 years ago. Gerald had his stroke on March 5th. 2 days. He'd lived 2 days after writing this letter, after confronting Dylan, after trying to protect me. My husband hadn't died of natural causes. The certainty of it hit me like a physical blow. Dylan had killed his own father, and now he was trying to erase his mother. I gathered the papers with shaking hands, stuffing them into my purse. I needed to leave, needed to hide these somewhere safe, needed to— Mrs. Mosley Braun? Tyler was at the door, his face concerned. Behind him stood Detective Walsh. Mrs. Mosley Braun, the detective said gently, I think we need to talk. Your son reported that you left the bank earlier without your medication, that you seemed disoriented. He's very worried about you. I hadn't been to any bank earlier. I'd been at home. But of course Dylan would say that. He was building his case step by step, making me look confused and unreliable. I'm perfectly oriented, I said clearly. I know exactly what day it is, where I am, and what's happening. And I'm not going anywhere with you until I speak to a lawyer of my own choosing. Detective Walsh exchanged a glance with Tyler. Mrs. Mosley Braun, no one's trying to force you to go anywhere. But your son says you need medication for your heart condition, that going without it could be dangerous. He's on his way here now. Why don't we just wait for him to arrive? Because the moment Dylan arrived, I was finished. He'd have me declared incompetent on the spot, taken to a hospital for evaluation, locked away where I couldn't fight back. My heart is fine, I said, and I don't need my son. What I need is for people to stop treating me like I'm senile and start listening to what I'm saying. I pushed past them, clutching my purse with its precious evidence. Tyler tried to stop me, but I gave him a look that made him step back. Detective Walsh called after me, but I was already through the bank's front door, already moving down the street as fast as my 63-year-old legs could carry me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to run. Behind me, I heard Walsh on her radio, calling for backup. They thought I was a confused elderly woman having some kind of episode. They didn't know I'd just discovered that my son was a murderer, that I was holding evidence that could destroy him, that every second I remained free was another second he couldn't complete his plan to erase me from existence. The October sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the street. I ducked into an alley between two buildings, then into another, then emerged on a side street I barely recognized. I was lost in my own town, running from my own family, carrying proof of crimes I couldn't report without sounding insane. And somewhere behind me, Dylan was coming. Margaret Holloway had been my best friend for 40 years. We'd raised our children together, survived the challenges of marriage and motherhood side by side, buried our husbands within a year of each other. If there was anyone in the world I could trust, it was Margaret. I called her from a gas station 3 blocks from the bank, using the last of my composure to keep my voice steady. "Eleanor, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I need help, Margaret. Can I come to your house? Please don't tell anyone I'm coming. Not anyone." There was a pause. Margaret was no fool. "What's happened?" "I can't explain over the phone. Please, Margaret. I need somewhere safe to think. Come now, I'll put the kettle on." Margaret lived in the historic district, a 15-minute walk that felt like miles. I kept to side streets, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Dylan's BMW or a police cruiser. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might actually give out, which would have been ironic considering Dylan's fictional narrative about my heart medication. Margaret's house was a small Victorian cottage painted cheerful yellow, with flower boxes that she tended obsessively. She opened the door before I could knock, took one look at my face and pulled me inside. "Sit," she commanded, steering me to her kitchen table. "Talk." I told her everything. The lawyer's warning, the missing person report, Gerald's letter, Dylan's debts, the slow, creeping realization that my son had murdered his father and was now systematically destroying my life to cover his tracks and steal my estate. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and pressed both hands against her mouth. "Sweet heaven," she whispered. "Eleanor, are you absolutely certain? This is your son, your only child. I know what it sounds like. I know I sound paranoid, possibly delusional. That's exactly what Dylan wants everyone to think." I pulled out Gerald's letter, hands still shaking. "But read this. Gerald knew. He tried to warn me before he died." Margaret read the letter twice, her lips moving silently over the words. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. "Gerald's stroke? You think Dylan caused it somehow?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe the timing was just convenient for him. But Margaret, Gerald died 2 days after writing this letter. 2 days after confronting Dylan. That can't be coincidence." "Have you shown this to the police?" "The police think I'm a confused elderly woman who's been reported missing by her concerned son. If I walk into that station making accusations of murder and fraud, they'll have me committed for psychiatric evaluation before I finish the first sentence. Dylan's already laid the groundwork perfectly." Margaret stood abruptly and went to her window, peering through the lace curtains. "No one followed you here?" "I don't think so. But I can't be sure." She turned back to me, her face set with determination. "We need help. Professional help. Someone who can investigate this properly. Who would believe me? I have no proof Gerald was murdered. The stroke was confirmed by the hospital, the death certificate signed by doctors. And everything Dylan's done with my estate? He could claim I authorized it all and just don't remember. He has Patricia backing up his story about my memory problems." "Patricia," Margaret said slowly. "Eleanor, have you considered that she might not be fully aware of what Dylan's doing? She's a doctor. Surely she wouldn't knowingly participate in declaring you incompetent if you're not." I wanted to believe that. But I remembered Patricia's tight smile in the car that morning, the way she'd avoided my eyes. I think she knows exactly what's happening. She's probably been documenting my supposed cognitive decline for months. Every time I forgot where I put my keys, every time I had to check my calendar twice, she was probably writing it down, building a case. Margaret returned to the table and took my hands. Then we build our own case. Right now, today. We document your mental clarity. I'll write a statement saying you're completely lucid and aware. We'll take photographs with today's newspaper. We'll record you discussing current events, doing math problems, whatever it takes to prove your sound of mind. It was a start, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Dylan's had weeks to build his narrative. We have one afternoon. Then we use that afternoon well. But first, you need to eat something. You're pale as milk, and I can see you shaking. She made me soup while I sat at her table, trying to organize my thoughts. The documents from Gerald's safety deposit box were spread before me. Property deeds, bank statements, investment records. $3 million worth of assets that Dylan wanted badly enough to destroy his own mother. What kind of debt could be this serious? Margaret asked, setting a bowl of vegetable soup in front of me. You said Gerald mentioned people he tried to investigate. The letter doesn't specify, just says Dylan borrowed money for investments that never materialized. I forced myself to eat, though the soup tasted like cardboard. But if Gerald felt the need to warn me, if he thought these people were dangerous enough to investigate, my phone rang. Dylan's number. I stared at it, my hand frozen halfway to my mouth with the soup spoon. Don't answer, Margaret said. But I did. I needed to know what he'd say, how he'd play this. I needed to understand my enemy. Mom, where are you? Detective Walsh said you ran out of the bank. She said you seemed disoriented and frightened. We're all so worried. His voice was perfect, concerned, loving, just the right amount of panic. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed him completely. I'm fine, Dylan. I'm with a friend. Which friend? Mom, please, you need to come home or at least let me pick you up. You left without your heart medication. Dr. Harrison said, I don't have a heart condition, I interrupted. I've never seen any Dr. Harrison, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop telling lies about me to the police. Silence on the other end. When Dylan spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Mom, you're not well. You're having paranoid delusions. This is exactly what Patricia and I have been worried about. You need help. What I need is for you to stop trying to steal my estate. Steal your mom. That's insane. I'm trying to help you manage your affairs because you're no longer capable of doing it yourself. The fact that you can't see that just proves how serious your condition has become. My condition, I said slowly, is that I'm a widow who trusted her son, and he betrayed me. I know about the debts, Dylan. I know about the money you borrowed from your father. I know why you need my properties so desperately. Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Where did you get that information? From your father. He left me a letter before he died. He knew what you were planning. That's impossible. Dad didn't. He wouldn't. Dylan stopped himself, but the damage was done. He'd just confirmed that there was something to hide. Didn't what? I pressed. Didn't have time to warn me? Didn't survive long enough to stop you? You're making accusations you can't possibly prove. Accusations that make you sound completely unhinged. Mom, I'm trying to protect you from yourself, but you're making that very difficult. I don't need your protection. I need you to leave me alone. That's not going to happen. You're my mother. You're sick. And whether you understand it or not, I'm going to make sure you get the care you need, even if that means having you committed involuntarily. There it was. The threat, spoken plainly. He'd have me locked away in a psychiatric facility where I couldn't fight back, couldn't access my accounts, couldn't defend myself legally. He'd become my guardian, control my estate, and I'd disappear into the system as just another elderly woman who'd lost her mind. Try it, I said, and hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Margaret took it from me and turned it off completely. "He threatened you," she said. We both heard it. His word against mine. And I'm the one who's supposedly delusional. I pushed the soup away, my appetite gone. "Margaret, I need to disappear. Really disappear. If he can't find me, he can't have me committed. You can stay here. I'll tell anyone who asks that I haven't seen you. He'll check here first. You're my closest friend." I stood, my mind racing. I need somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Somewhere I can hide while I figure out how to fight back. "The cabin," Margaret said suddenly. "Tom's fishing cabin up at Lake Willoughby. We still own it, though we haven't used it since he died. No one knows about it except family. It was perfect. Remote, off any grid Dylan might search." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Margaret went to her key rack and pulled down a set of keys. "There's firewood, canned goods, basic supplies. No internet, but there's a landline if you need it. Take my car. Dylan won't recognize it." I hugged her hard. This friend who believed me when no one else would. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Just promise me you'll be careful." "And Eleanor?" She pulled back, holding my shoulders. "We need to find out how Gerald really died. If Dylan killed his father, that changes everything. That's murder, not just fraud. The police would have to take you seriously." She was right. But how do you prove a stroke was murder 2 years after the fact? The body was cremated, the ashes scattered. There would be no autopsy now, no physical evidence. Unless there was something else, something Gerald had discovered, something he'd tried to investigate. "The people Dylan borrowed money from," I said slowly. "Gerald tried to find out who they were. What if he succeeded? What if that information is somewhere in his records?" We went through the documents from the safety deposit box more carefully, looking for anything that might indicate who had loaned Dylan money. Bank statements showed regular withdrawals from Gerald's accounts, but no corresponding deposits elsewhere. Investment records revealed losses, but nothing that explained debts serious enough to motivate murder. Then Margaret found it. A business card tucked into the back of one of the folders. No name, just a phone number and an address in Boston. On the back, Gerald had written, "D's creditor. Dangerous. Do not engage." "Boston," I said. "Dylan lives in Boston. You can't go there. Eleanor, if these people are dangerous enough that Gerald warned you against them, I'm not going to engage them. But I need to know who they are, what Dylan owes them, why my estate is the solution to his problems." I tucked the card into my wallet. Once I know that, I'll know how to expose him. Margaret drove me to the cabin herself, refusing to let me go alone despite my protests. The drive took 90 minutes, winding through mountains that were already shadowed with evening. The cabin was exactly as she'd described, small, rustic, isolated. You could scream out here and no one would hear you. That thought was less comforting than it should have been. "There's a shotgun in the closet," Margaret said as she helped me unload supplies from her car. "Tom kept it for wildlife. Do you remember how to use it?" "I'm not shooting my son, Margaret. I'm not asking you to. But if someone shows up who isn't your son, someone connected to those Boston creditors, I want you able to defend yourself." She had a point. I checked the gun, unloaded, thank goodness, and found the ammunition locked in a small safe under the bed. The combination was Tom's birthday. Margaret had thought of everything. "I'll call you every day," she promised. "If I don't hear from you by 8 p.m., I'm calling the police myself, accusations of insanity or not." After she left, the silence was overwhelming. I sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by documents and evidence, and let myself finally break down. I cried for Gerald, for the son I thought I'd raised, for the life that had been stolen from me piece by piece. Then I dried my tears, made a pot of coffee, and got to work. Gerald's records were meticulous. Over the next 3 hours, I constructed a timeline of Dylan's borrowing. 20,000 in January 5 years ago, 30,000 that August, 15,000 the following spring, always with excuses, a business opportunity, a real estate investment, a chance to expand his portfolio. The borrowing stopped 2 years ago, right around the time Gerald died. Had Dylan paid back the loans? Or had something else happened? I pulled out the business card again, staring at the phone number. Dangerous, Gerald had written. Do not engage. But sometimes you had no choice but to engage. I used the cabin's landline to call the number, my heart racing. A man answered on the third ring, his voice rough and impatient. Yeah? I'm calling about Dylan Mosley Braun, I said, keeping my voice steady. I understand he owes you money. A long pause. Who is this? His mother, Elizabeth Mosley Braun. Another pause, then a low chuckle. Lady, your son doesn't owe me anything anymore. He paid his debts in full. Cash. 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Right after Gerald died. How much did he owe you? I asked. That's between me and him, but let's just say it was enough that I'm surprised he came up with it. Guy was drowning for years, then suddenly he's flush with cash. Figured he must have hit the lottery or something. Or murdered his father and stolen the life insurance payout. Thank you, I said, and hung up before he could ask more questions. I sat staring at the phone, pieces clicking into place. Dylan had owed money to dangerous people. Gerald discovered the debt, confronted Dylan. Then Gerald died suddenly, and Dylan used the life insurance money, my life insurance money, to pay off his creditors. But that hadn't been enough. He still needed more. The estate, the properties, the investments, all of it totaling $3 million. Enough to ensure he'd never be in that kind of debt again. And the only thing standing between Dylan and financial security was me. A car engine sounded outside, growing louder. I froze, hand on the phone. No one knew I was here except Margaret. No one could have followed us. Could they? I moved to the window, staying back in the shadows. Headlights swept across the cabin's front yard as a dark SUV pulled to a stop. The engine died. The driver's door opened. Dylan stepped out. My blood turned to ice. He'd found me. Somehow he'd tracked me to this remote cabin in less than 4 hours. Which meant either he'd followed Margaret, or he'd known about this place all along, or Margaret had told him where I was. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Margaret, my best friend, the only person I thought I could trust. She'd sent me here deliberately, isolated and alone, where no one would hear me scream. Dylan walked to the cabin door and knocked. 3 sharp raps. Mom? I know you're in there. Margaret called me. She's worried about you. We're all worried about you. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. The shotgun was still unloaded, the ammunition locked away. Even if I got to it, could I really shoot my own son? Mom, please, let's just talk. That's all I want. Just a conversation so I can understand what you think is happening. Then if you still want me to leave, I will. I promise. His voice was so reasonable, so calm. But I'd heard that same calm voice on the phone earlier, right before he threatened to have me committed. I had 2 choices: open the door and face him, or run into the woods behind the cabin and hope I could survive a night in the October cold. Neither option would end well for me. Dylan knocked again, harder this time. Mom, I'm not leaving. You can't hide from me forever. You're sick. You need help. And I'm going to make sure you get it, whether you want it or not. The doorknob turned. The lock clicked. He had a key. Of course he had a key. Margaret had given him everything he needed to find me, trap me, finish what he'd started. The door swung open, and my son stepped inside. He was smiling. Hello, Mom. Dylan closed the door behind him, never taking his eyes off me. You're looking well, for someone who's supposedly too disoriented to find her own way home. I kept the kitchen table between us, my hand resting on the back of a chair. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. One door, and he was blocking it. Windows too small to climb through. The woods outside were dark and cold, and I was 63 with no survival skills beyond canning vegetables and balancing a checkbook. Margaret called you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She told you where I was. She was worried. You showed up at her house with wild stories about murder and conspiracy, acting paranoid and irrational. She did the right thing, calling me. She did the loving thing. He moved into the room, his movements casual but deliberate. Just like I'm doing the loving thing now, making sure you get help. I don't need help. I need you to stop trying to steal from me. Dylan's smile faded. Steal? Mom, everything I've done has been to protect you. To protect Dad's legacy. You can't manage the estate alone. You've proven that over the past 2 years. The missed payments, the forgotten appointments, the confusion about simple financial matters. I never missed any payments. I never forgot appointments. You're making that up, just like you made up the missing person report, just like you forged my signature on those property transfers. I didn't forge anything. He reached into his jacket pocket, and my body tensed, but he only pulled out his phone. I have videos, Mom. Recordings of our conversations about transferring the properties. You agreed to everything. You just don't remember. Show me. He held up the phone, tapped the screen. My own voice filled the cabin, tinny and distant. Yes, Dylan. That makes sense. You should handle the rental properties. I trust you completely. I stared at the phone, trying to remember when I'd said those words. The voice was mine. The cadence was mine. But I had no memory of that conversation. Had it happened? Was I really forgetting things? Losing pieces of my mind without realizing it? No. I couldn't afford to doubt myself now. That was exactly what he wanted. Context, I said. You're taking my words out of context. Or editing them together from different conversations. You're paranoid, Mom. Do you hear yourself? You think I'm splicing together fake recordings now? That I've spent months creating an elaborate conspiracy to, what? Take care of my own mother? To steal $3 million. The number hung in the air between us. Dylan's expression shifted, became calculating. So, you found Dad's safety deposit box. That's where you got all this information. The letter, the bank records. He knew what you were doing. He tried to stop you. He tried to control me, Dylan corrected, his voice turning cold. All my life, he controlled everything. The college I attended, the career I chose, the woman I married. Even when I tried to start my own business, make my own investments, he undermined me at every turn. Then he had the nerve to lecture me about responsibility when his controlling interference made everything fail. So you killed him. The words were out before I could stop them. Dylan went very still. That's a serious accusation. You needed money, desperately. He confronted you about the debts, and 2 days later he was dead. Then you used the life insurance payout to pay off your creditors. I spoke to them, Dylan. They told me you paid everything in full 2 years ago, right after your father's funeral. For a moment he said nothing. Then he laughed, a sound without humor. You called my creditors? Mom, do you understand how that sounds? You're making paranoid phone calls, accusing people of crimes, running away from anyone trying to help you. This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves you need psychiatric evaluation. Your father died of a stroke. Yes, he did. 2 days after he discovered your debts. Correlation isn't causation. He was 68 years old, overweight, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. The stroke was inevitable. The doctor said he could have gone at any time. Convenient timing. Dylan's jaw tightened. I loved my father. I would never... He stopped himself, shook his head. You know what? I don't have to defend myself against these insane accusations. You're sick, Mom. You're creating elaborate conspiracy theories because you can't accept that you're getting old, that your mind isn't what it used to be, and I'm done arguing with you about it. He pulled out his phone again, began typing. I'm calling Dr. Fletcher right now. He's the geriatric psychiatrist I mentioned. He's agreed to do an emergency evaluation. Patricia's already submitted her preliminary assessment. Patricia has no right to assess me. She's a pediatrician, not a psychiatrist. And she's your wife. That's a massive conflict of interest. She's a medical doctor who's observed your declining cognitive function for over a year. Her assessment carries weight. He put the phone to his ear. Yes, doctor. Fletcher? This is Dylan Mosley Braun. I have my mother with me now. Yes, she's safe, but she's extremely agitated and making delusional accusations. Can you meet us at Burlington General's psychiatric intake? Perfect. We'll be there in 2 hours. I'm not going anywhere with you. Dylan ended the call. Mom, you don't have a choice. I'm your son. I'm acting in your best interest. And if you refuse to come voluntarily, I'll have the police escort you. Detective Walsh has already expressed concerns about your mental state. Because you manipulated her into thinking I'm incompetent. No one manipulated anyone. You're doing this to yourself. Running from the bank, hiding out in remote cabins, making accusations of murder. How do you think that looks to the authorities? To anyone? He was right, and that terrified me more than anything. Every action I'd taken to protect myself had been spun into evidence of my incompetence. I'd played directly into his hands. The documents, I said desperately. I have Dad's letter, the bank records, everything proving what you've done. What documents? Dylan moved forward suddenly, scanning the kitchen table where I'd spread Gerald's evidence. His eyes widened, then narrowed. You took those from the safety deposit box. Mom, those are private financial records. You had no right. They're my records, my properties, my estate, that you can't properly manage. He reached for the papers, but I grabbed them first, clutching them to my chest. Mom, give me those. You're going to lose them or destroy them, and then we'll have no documentation of anything. That's exactly what you want, to destroy any evidence of what you've done. We stood facing each other across the small kitchen, the documents pressed between my hands and my racing heart. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The cabin's single overhead light cast harsh shadows that made my son look like a stranger. Last chance, Dylan said quietly. Give me the papers and come with me voluntarily. We'll get you evaluated, get you the help you need. The kids can visit you in the facility. We'll make sure you're comfortable. A facility. My voice was barely a whisper. You want to lock me away? I want to keep you safe, from yourself if necessary. And once I'm locked away, declared incompetent, you'll take control of everything. The properties, the investments, all of it. I'll be trapped in some psychiatric ward while you liquidate my entire life. I'll be managing your affairs responsibly, the way Dad should have taught me to from the beginning instead of treating me like a child who couldn't be trusted. Anger crept into Dylan's voice, the mask slipping. Do you know what it's like, having parents who never believed in you? Who controlled every aspect of your life and then acted surprised when you struggled? I built my own business from nothing, and Dad sabotaged it. He called my investors, told them I was unstable, unreliable. He destroyed me, Mom. And you let him. Gerald loved you. Everything he did was about control. And now you're trying to do the same thing, holding on to assets you can't manage, making accusations you can't prove, refusing help from the only person who actually cares about your welfare. If you cared about my welfare, you wouldn't have filed a false missing person report. You wouldn't have forged my signature on property transfers. You wouldn't have... My phone rang, cutting through the tension. We both looked at it where it lay on the table, Margaret's name on the screen. I reached for it, but Dylan was faster. Hello, Margaret, he said smoothly. Yes? I found her? She's safe. A little confused, but safe. He listened, his eyes never leaving my face. Actually, that would be very helpful. Can you bring them to Burlington General? We're taking Mom there now for evaluation. Perfect. See you soon. He ended the call and pocketed my phone. Margaret's bringing your medications. The heart pills you supposedly don't need, the blood pressure medication, everything. She's also bringing your medical records, which apparently show a concerning pattern of missed appointments and forgotten prescriptions. I don't have heart pills. I've never missed medical appointments. Then you won't mind when the doctors confirm that, will you? He moved toward me, his hand outstretched. The papers, Mom. Give them to me and let's end this. I backed away, hitting the kitchen counter. No. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You murdered your father. The words hung between us, sharp and final. Dylan's expression went blank, then twisted into something I'd never seen before. Rage. Pure, undiluted rage. You're going to regret saying that, he said softly, because now there's no going back. No easy resolution. You've forced my hand, Mom. He lunged for the papers. I twisted away, trying to reach the front door, but he was faster and stronger. His hand closed on my arm, yanking me backward. The documents scattered across the floor as I fought to break free. Stop fighting me, Dylan shouted. I'm trying to help you. By stealing everything I have? It's not stealing if you're incompetent to manage it yourself. We struggled in the small space, knocking over chairs, sending Gerald's carefully organized evidence skittering under furniture. I wasn't strong enough to break his grip, wasn't fast enough to escape. 63 years felt ancient as my son overpowered me with humiliating ease. Then I remembered the shotgun. It was still unloaded, useless as a weapon. But Dylan didn't know that. I wrenched free for just a moment and lunged for the bedroom, grabbing the gun from the closet. When I turned back, Dylan had frozen in the doorway. "Mom, put that down. Stay back. That's Tom's hunting shotgun. Do you even know how to use it?" Well enough. My hands shook, making the barrel waver. "Get out, Dylan. Get out of this cabin and leave me alone." "Or what? You'll shoot your own son?" He took a step forward. "You won't. You can't. You're a kind woman, a good mother. Violence isn't in your nature." He was right. Even holding the gun made me feel sick. But I kept it raised, kept my finger near the trigger, praying he wouldn't call my bluff. "The police are on their way," Dylan said calmly. "Margaret called them before she called me. They know you're here, armed and dangerous, holding your concerned son at gunpoint. How do you think this looks, Mom? How does this help your case that you're perfectly rational and competent?" My blood went cold. Margaret had called the police. Of course she had. One more piece of evidence that I was unstable, dangerous, in need of immediate psychiatric intervention. "They'll be here in 20 minutes, Dylan continued. "So you have a choice. Put down the gun, come with me voluntarily, and we'll tell them you were just confused, scared, acting on impulse. Or keep pointing that weapon at me, and when they arrive, they'll have no choice but to take you into custody, possibly charge you with assault, definitely mandate psychiatric evaluation in a locked facility. You've thought of everything. I've been planning this for 2 years. Since the day Dad died and I realized I finally had a chance to salvage my life from the ruins he created." Dylan's voice was matter-of-fact, almost proud. Every conversation recorded, every incident documented, every supposed memory lapse carefully noted and verified by Patricia. The missing person report to establish a pattern of confusion. The power of attorney to ensure legal control. It's perfect, Mom. Airtight. And nothing you do now can change it. Gerald's letter is hearsay. The paranoid ravings of a controlling old man who couldn't accept that his son might succeed without his interference. No court would give it credence, especially against the mountain of evidence I've compiled showing your declining mental state." He was right. I could see it all playing out exactly as he described. The police arriving to find me holding a gun on my son. The psychiatric evaluation that would declare me incompetent. The legal proceedings that would give Dylan control of everything. The years I'd spend locked away in some facility while he sold off my properties, spent my investments, erased every trace of the life Gerald and I had built. Unless I did something so unexpected, so completely out of character, that it shattered Dylan's perfect plan. I lowered the shotgun. Dylan smiled, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, Mom. I know this is hard, but..." I threw the gun at him. Not to hurt him. It wasn't loaded. Wasn't even a threat. But to buy seconds. While he flinched and ducked, I grabbed the documents from the floor, shoved them inside my jacket, and ran. Out the cabin door, into the October darkness, into woods I didn't know with no plan beyond pure survival. Behind me, Dylan shouted my name, but I was already gone, crashing through underbrush, following the slope downward because down meant water, and water meant roads. Branches tore at my clothes and face. Roots tried to trip me. The cold cut through my thin jacket like knives. But I ran, driven by terror and rage and the absolute certainty that stopping meant losing everything. Somewhere behind me, I heard sirens. The police arriving right on schedule. They'd find Dylan, hear his story about his delusional mother who'd held him at gunpoint. They'd send search teams into these woods, hunting for a confused elderly woman who might die of exposure before morning. They wouldn't find someone running for her life. They'd find someone who refused to surrender. I just had to survive long enough to prove my son was a murderer and a thief. In the darkness, with police dogs beginning to bay in the distance, that seemed impossible. But I kept running anyway. I didn't die in those woods, though I came close. What saved me wasn't strength or courage, but pure, stubborn refusal to let Dylan win. I followed the stream until I found a hiking trail, followed the trail until I reached a road, and followed the road until headlights appeared in the distance. A young couple in a pickup truck stopped when they saw me stumbling along the shoulder, bloody and covered in dirt. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help?" I must have looked like exactly what Dylan had been describing. A confused elderly woman, lost and disoriented, in desperate need of assistance. But I'd learned something in those hours fleeing through the darkness. Sometimes looking weak was its own kind of weapon. "My car broke down," I said, making my voice tremble. "About 5 miles back. I've been walking for hours. Could you possibly give me a ride to the next town?" They drove me to St. Johnsbury, a town large enough to have hotels that didn't ask too many questions. I paid cash for a room. Thank goodness I'd grabbed my purse before running and locked myself inside. My phone was gone, taken by Dylan at the cabin. My car was still at Margaret's house. I had nothing but the clothes I was wearing, Gerald's documents pressed against my chest, and a clarity of purpose that cut through everything else like a knife. I couldn't run forever. Eventually, Dylan would find me. The police would find me. And when they did, I'd be exactly what he'd made me appear. A fugitive, irrational, and dangerous. Unless I turned the tables completely. The hotel room had a computer for guests. I spent 3 hours that night researching, planning, preparing for what I had to do. Then I slept for exactly 4 hours, showered with the tiny soap provided, and walked to the local library when it opened at 9. The librarian was a woman about my age with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read, Susan. "I need to use your computer," I told her. "And I need to make some phone calls. It's urgent." Something in my face must have convinced her not to ask questions. She set me up at a private terminal and showed me how to access email. Then she brought me coffee without being asked, a small kindness that nearly made me cry. I started with Marcus Whitfield, the lawyer who'd warned me about Dylan's scheme. His email was on his business card, which I'd somehow kept in my wallet through everything. I typed carefully, explaining what had happened, attaching photos I took with the library's scanner of Gerald's letter and the key financial documents. "Mr. Whitfield," I wrote, "you were right about everything. My son has escalated his plan. I need legal help immediately, but I can't come to you. I'm currently wanted by police for allegedly threatening him with a weapon. Please read the attached documents. They prove Gerald suspected Dylan before his death. I believe my husband was murdered, and I need help proving it before Dylan has me permanently committed. I'm at the St. Johnsbury Public Library. If you can help me, please respond quickly. If you can't, please forward this to someone who can. Elizabeth Mosley Braun." Then I emailed Detective Walsh. This message was more difficult to write, but I kept it factual, clinical, void of the emotion that would make me seem unstable. "Detective Walsh, this is Elizabeth Mosley Braun. I'm writing to formally request an investigation into my husband Gerald Mosley Braun's death on March 5th, 2 years ago. I have evidence suggesting it may not have been natural causes. I also have documentation proving that my son Dylan Mosley Braun has been systematically attempting to steal my estate by falsely portraying me as mentally incompetent. I'm willing to submit to any cognitive testing you deem necessary to prove my mental competence. However, I request that such testing be conducted by an independent psychiatrist with no connection to my family. The attached documents support my claims. I'm currently at the St. Johnsbury Public Library and will remain here until 3 p.m. today, after which I'll be forced to relocate for safety reasons. If you're willing to hear my case fairly, please respond. Elizabeth Mosley Braun." I sent similar emails to the Burlington Police Chief, to Vermont's Adult Protective Services, and to 3 investigative journalists I found who specialized in elder financial abuse. I was casting a wide net, hoping someone, anyone, would listen before Dylan's narrative became the only one that mattered. Then I waited. The library's clock ticked toward noon. Susan brought me a sandwich, refusing payment. "You look like you're fighting something important," she said quietly. "Whatever it is, I hope you win." At 12:47, Marcus Whitfield responded, "Mrs. Mosley Braun, I've reviewed your documents. I believe you. I've also been conducting my own investigation since our meeting. Your son's financial history raises serious red flags. I've contacted a colleague who specializes in elder law and estate fraud. Her name is Jennifer Reeves, and she's willing to represent you pro bono given the severity of the situation. More importantly, I've shared your information with a friend who's an investigative journalist with the Boston Herald. She's very interested in your case, particularly the potential connection to your husband's death. Can you meet us at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I promise you'll be safe there. I've already contacted Detective Walsh's supervisor to express my concerns about potential bias in her investigation. Bring everything you have. We're going to fight this together. Marcus." I read the email 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. Help. Real professional help from people who believed me. At 1:15, Detective Walsh responded, "Mrs. Mosley Braun, I received your email and attachments. I'd like to speak with you in person about your allegations. I'm troubled by several aspects of this case that haven't added up from the beginning. Your son's missing person report contained inconsistencies I've been investigating. I can meet you at the St. Johnsbury Library at 2 p.m. today with a witness present to ensure you feel safe. I'm bringing Detective Michael Torres from our cold case unit to discuss your husband's death. Please wait for us. This is not a trap. You're not under arrest. I simply want to hear your side of the story." Detective Kathy Walsh. Could I trust her? Or was this exactly what Dylan had predicted? Law enforcement working with him to bring his delusional mother into custody. I looked at Susan, who was shelving books nearby, but keeping a protective eye on me. "If some police detectives come here asking for me, would you be willing to stay in the room while I talk to them? As a witness?" She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." At exactly 2 p.m., Detective Walsh arrived with a tall, gray-haired man she introduced as Detective Torres. Susan positioned herself at a nearby desk, close enough to hear, but far enough to give us privacy. The library's security cameras would record everything. If they tried to take me forcibly, there would be evidence. "Mrs. Mosley Braun," Walsh began, settling into the chair across from me. "I owe you an apology. I should have questioned your son's story more carefully from the beginning. Some things didn't add up, but I dismissed my concerns because he seemed so genuinely worried about you. He's a very good actor. That's becoming clear." She pulled out a tablet, showed me Dylan's missing person report. "He claimed you left your home without medication on September 15th, but I checked with your pharmacy. You haven't filled prescriptions for any of the medications he claimed you need. No heart medication, no blood pressure pills. Nothing. Because I don't take those medications. I don't need them." "I know. I spoke with your actual doctor. Dr. Patricia Mosley Braun had no legal authority to provide the medical assessment she submitted. She's not your physician, and pediatricians can't diagnose dementia. The whole thing was fraudulent." Hope flared in my chest. "You believe me." "I'm starting to. Tell me about your husband's death." I told them everything. Gerald's letter, Dylan's debts, the suspicious timing of the stroke, the life insurance payout used to clear those debts. Torres took notes, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. "A stroke can be induced," he said when I finished. "Certain medications, if administered incorrectly or in combination, can trigger one. If your husband was on blood thinners or blood pressure medication," he was. "Both. Then it's possible someone manipulated his doses. It would be difficult to prove after 2 years, but not impossible. We'd need to interview his doctors, review his medical records, check his prescription history for any irregularities." Torres looked at Walsh. "This warrants a full investigation." "Agreed." Walsh turned back to me. "Mrs. Mosley Braun, your son has filed charges against you for assault with a deadly weapon. That's serious. But given what we're uncovering, I'm not convinced his version of events is accurate. Will you submit to a psychological evaluation by an independent expert?" "Yes." "Absolutely. And will you turn over all the documents you have? We'll need them as evidence." I hesitated. Those documents were my only leverage, my only proof. If I gave them up and the investigation went nowhere, I'd have nothing left to fight with. Torres seemed to read my mind. We'll make certified copies. You keep the originals until this goes to court. But Mrs. Mosley Braun, you need to understand. If your son murdered your husband and is attempting to steal your estate through fraudulent means, this is a criminal case. It's not just about your property anymore. It's about justice. Justice. The word hit me hard. I'd been so focused on survival, on protecting what was mine, that I'd almost forgotten. Dylan might have murdered his father, my husband, the man I'd loved for 40 years. What do I need to do? I asked. Walsh smiled grimly. First, we get you somewhere safe. Then we build a case so airtight your son won't be able to manipulate his way out of it. They arranged for me to stay in a safe house, a small apartment maintained by Adult Protective Services for victims of elder abuse. It wasn't luxurious, but it was secure. Over the next 3 days, I worked with Jennifer Reeves, the attorney Whitfield had recommended. She was a fierce woman in her 50s who'd built her career defending vulnerable adults from predatory family members. Your case is unfortunately typical, she told me during our first meeting. Adult child with financial problems sees elderly parent as a solution. They systematically undermine the parent's credibility, isolate them from friends and other family, manipulate legal and medical systems to gain control. The sophistication of your son's approach is what makes this case unusual. He's been planning this meticulously. Can we stop him? Yes, but it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. She spread documents across her desk. We need to prove 2 things. First, that you're mentally competent. Second, that your son has been engaging in fraud and possibly worse. The competency evaluation happens tomorrow. I've arranged for Dr. Helen Yao, one of the most respected geriatric psychiatrists in New England. She's completely independent, has no relationship with your family, and her assessments hold up in court. The evaluation took 6 hours. Dr. Yao tested my memory, my reasoning, my ability to manage complex information. She asked about my daily routines, my understanding of current events, my grasp of my own financial situation. She was thorough, meticulous, and completely neutral. 2 days later, her report arrived. Elizabeth Mosley Braun demonstrates cognitive function consistent with normal aging. She shows no signs of dementia, psychosis, or any other mental illness that would impair her judgment or decision-making capacity. Her memory is intact. Her reasoning is sound. She is fully capable of managing her own affairs. Any claims to the contrary are not supported by clinical evidence. Jennifer called me immediately. We have what we need. Eleanor, you're officially competent. Any legal actions your son has taken under the assumption of your incompetence are now void. But that was only half the battle. Detective Torres had been investigating Gerald's death. He'd interviewed the doctors who treated him, reviewed pharmacy records, and found something disturbing. In the week before Gerald's stroke, someone had picked up his prescriptions using his pharmacy account. But Gerald had been home that entire week with a cold. He hadn't left the house. Who picked up the medications? I asked when Torres called with the update. Your son, Dylan Mosley Braun. He has access to your husband's pharmacy account as an authorized family member. He picked up both prescriptions, blood thinner and blood pressure medication, 3 days before your husband's stroke. My blood ran cold. Dylan wasn't living here then. He was in Boston. Why would he drive 4 hours to pick up prescriptions when Gerald could have done it himself? That's the question. And here's another one. The pharmacy records show he picked up both medications. But when the paramedics arrived at your house after your husband's stroke, they only found 1 bottle. The blood thinner was in the medicine cabinet. The blood pressure medication was missing. Missing? Never found. And Mrs. Mosley Braun. If someone with medical knowledge, say a pediatrician married to your son, knew which medications your husband took, knew the doses, knew the potential interactions, it would be relatively simple to cause a stroke. Increase the blood pressure medication significantly, and the body can't compensate. It looks completely natural, especially in a man with existing health concerns. Patricia, Dylan's wife, a doctor who would know exactly how to make murder look like natural causes. Can you prove it? I asked. We're trying. It's circumstantial, but it's building. Combined with the financial fraud, the forged documents, the false missing person report, we have enough to bring charges. The DA wants to meet with you. Everything was moving fast now, pieces clicking into place. Jennifer filed motions to invalidate every document Dylan had signed in my name. The police obtained warrants for Dylan's financial records, phone records, email accounts. Marcus Whitfield provided evidence that several of my supposed signatures on legal documents were forgeries. The pressure patterns were wrong, suggesting someone had traced my signature rather than me signing naturally. And then the journalist, a woman named Catherine Mills, published her article. Beloved son or master manipulator. Vermont woman claims decades-long plot to steal estate. Ran in the Boston Herald with my story, Gerald's letter, and interviews with experts on elder financial abuse. Within hours, it had been picked up by national news outlets. My phone, a new one provided by the police, started ringing with calls from other families who'd experienced similar situations. Adult children who'd manipulated elderly parents, forged documents, false medical claims, stolen estates. I wasn't alone. This was an epidemic, and my case was shining a light on it. Dylan's lawyer called Jennifer. My client is willing to settle. He'll return all properties to Mrs. Mosley Braun, void the power of attorney, and we can all avoid the unpleasantness of a trial. No settlement, I told Jennifer immediately. If he murdered Gerald, he goes to trial. If he attempted to steal from me through fraud, he goes to trial. I want justice, not compromise. Jennifer smiled. That's what I told them you'd say. The district attorney scheduled a meeting. It was time for the final confrontation, the moment when I would face my son in an official capacity and force him to answer for everything he'd done. I spent the night before reviewing every piece of evidence, preparing mentally for what was to come. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about making sure no other elderly person would suffer what I'd suffered. No other son or daughter would be allowed to destroy their parents' life for financial gain. The next morning, Jennifer, Detective Walsh, Detective Torres and I walked into the DA's office together. And there, sitting with his own lawyer, his face carefully neutral, was Dylan. Our eyes met across the room. For just a moment, I saw my little boy, the child I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, sent off to college with tears in my eyes. Then I blinked and saw him clearly, a man who'd killed his father and tried to erase his mother. Shall we begin? The DA asked. I took my seat, placed my hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking, and prepared to tell the truth that would either save me or destroy what was left of my family. Either way, I wasn't running anymore. The district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Thornton, laid out the evidence methodically. Pharmacy records showing Dylan had picked up Gerald's medications days before the stroke. Financial documents proving he'd used the life insurance payout to clear mysterious debts. Forged signatures on property transfers. The false missing person report. Patricia's fraudulent medical assessment. Every piece of Dylan's carefully constructed plan, now exposed in the harsh light of legal scrutiny. Dylan's lawyer, an expensive suited man named Harrison, tried to counter each point. My client was helping his elderly father manage medications. The missing person report was filed out of genuine concern. The property transfers were discussed verbally with Mrs. Mosley Braun, who simply doesn't recall the conversations due to her age-related memory decline. Mrs. Mosley Braun has been evaluated by Dr. Helen Yao. Jennifer Reeves interjected smoothly, sliding the psychiatric report across the table. Dr. Yao is one of the most respected geriatric psychiatrists in New England. Her assessment is unequivocal. Elizabeth Mosley Braun has no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Her memory is intact. Her judgment is sound. Any claims to the contrary are medically baseless. Harrison barely glanced at the report. One doctor's opinion against months of documented incidents. Documented by whom? Jennifer's voice was cool as ice. By your client, who had a $3 million motive to portray his mother as incompetent. By his wife, a pediatrician with no authority to diagnose geriatric conditions and a clear conflict of interest. Where are the independent medical records? The hospital visits for confusion? The emergency room admissions for wandering? They don't exist, Mr. Harrison, because Mrs. Mosley Braun was never impaired. The recordings, Harrison began. Audio clips taken out of context, possibly edited, and obtained without Mrs. Mosley Braun's knowledge or consent. They prove nothing except that your client was willing to manipulate his own mother's words to serve his purposes. I watched Dylan's face as Jennifer dismantled his defense. He sat perfectly still, his expression controlled, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. He'd expected to win through charm and manipulation, the way he'd won his entire life. He hadn't prepared for someone who could match his deception with cold, hard facts. D.A. Thornton turned to Detective Torres. Walk us through the medical evidence regarding Gerald Mosley Braun's death. Torres opened his file. Gerald Mosley Braun died of a stroke on March 5th, 2 years ago. At the time, it was ruled natural causes. He was 68, had high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. However, new evidence suggests the stroke may have been induced. That's absurd, Harrison said. You're claiming my client murdered his own father based on what? Coincidental timing? Based on evidence. Torres remained calm. 3 days before Gerald Mosley Braun's death, Dylan Mosley Braun picked up his father's prescriptions from the pharmacy, both blood pressure medication and blood thinners. Gerald was homesick that week and hadn't left the house. When paramedics arrived after the stroke, they found the blood thinner in the medicine cabinet. The blood pressure medication was never found. So it was misplaced. That proves nothing. Gerald Mosley Braun's prescription was for 30 pills, 1 per day. The pharmacy record shows it was a new prescription, filled that day. The paramedics searched the entire house. It's standard protocol in stroke cases to identify all medications the patient was taking. That bottle should have been there. It wasn't. Torres pulled out another document. I also interviewed Gerald Mosley Braun's physician, Dr. Robert Hines. He confirmed that Gerald was meticulous about his medications, kept them organized in a pill box, never missed doses. The idea that he'd misplace a new prescription 3 days after picking it up, or rather, after his son picked it up, is inconsistent with his established patterns. You're speculating, Harrison said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. I'm investigating, Torres corrected. And here's what I found. If someone with medical knowledge wanted to induce a stroke in a patient taking blood thinners, they could do it by significantly increasing the blood pressure medication. The combination of thinned blood and severely elevated pressure creates perfect conditions for a cerebral hemorrhage. It would look exactly like a natural stroke, especially in a patient with existing cardiovascular risk factors. All eyes turned to Dylan. His face had gone pale. My client refuses to answer any questions about his father's death without immunity, Harrison said quickly. D.A. Thornton smiled coldly. We're not offering immunity. The room fell silent. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was the moment. Either they had enough to charge Dylan, or his lawyer would negotiate some deal that let him walk away. Mrs. Mosley Braun, Thornton said, turning to me, I want you to understand what we're looking at here. The evidence for fraud and attempted elder abuse is substantial. We can definitely prosecute those charges. The evidence for your husband's murder is more circumstantial. We may not get a conviction on that count. Are you prepared for the possibility that your son could be found guilty of fraud but not murder? I looked at Dylan. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. If he goes to prison for fraud, that's justice. If we can't prove he killed Gerald, at least we tried. At least the truth is out there. The truth, Dylan said suddenly, his voice bitter, is that you and Dad never understood what I was going through. You had everything. The house, the properties, the investments, while I was drowning in debt because Dad sabotaged every business opportunity I ever had. He told my investors I was unreliable. He called my clients and suggested they work with competitors. He systematically destroyed my career because he couldn't stand the idea that I might succeed without his help. So you killed him? I asked quietly. Dylan's lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Dylan shook it off. I didn't kill anyone. Dad had a stroke. It was natural causes. The fact that the timing was convenient for me doesn't change that. But you did take his blood pressure medication, Torres said. You picked it up from the pharmacy. Where did it go? I don't remember. Maybe I left it in my car. Maybe Dad moved it. I had no reason to keep track of it. It was his medication, not mine. And the missing person report? D.A. Thornton asked. The forged signatures on property transfers? The fraudulent medical assessment? Dylan's composure was cracking. I was trying to protect her. Mom was struggling after Dad died. She wasn't managing the estate properly. Properties needed maintenance. Bills were going unpaid. That's a lie, I said, my voice steady and clear. Every property was maintained. Every bill was paid on time. I have bank records proving it. You weren't trying to protect me, Dylan. You were trying to steal from me. I was trying to survive. The words burst out of him, raw and angry. Do you know what it's like having parents who control every aspect of your life? Who make you feel inadequate no matter what you achieve? I built my own business, and Dad destroyed it. I made my own investments, and he undermined them. Everything I tried, he sabotaged. And when I finally got into trouble, really serious trouble with people who don't negotiate, he refused to help me. Said I needed to learn responsibility. So yes, I took out loans. Yes, I got desperate. And yes, when he died and left that insurance money, I used it to save my own life. And then you came after me for the rest, I said softly. I needed it. Dylan's voice was anguished now, the mask completely gone. Patricia and I have kids. We have a mortgage. We have expectations to maintain. Your estate was just sitting there, being mismanaged, going to waste. I'm your only child. It would all come to me eventually anyway. I just needed it sooner. So you decided to make me disappear. I decided to take control of a situation that was spiraling out of control. If you'd just cooperated, if you'd just let me manage things the way Dad should have let me manage things years ago, none of this would have been necessary. Harrison was frantically shaking his head, trying to stop Dylan from talking, but my son was beyond listening. Years of resentment and rage were pouring out, unstoppable. You want to know the truth? Dylan said, looking directly at me for the first time. The truth is, I'm glad Dad's dead. I'm glad I don't have to live under his judgment anymore. And yes, I took his blood pressure medication. Yes, I knew what it could do when combined with his other medications. Patricia explained it to me. We researched it, but I didn't force him to take anything. I just made it available, left it where he could find it. If he took too much, that was his choice. The room went completely silent. Harrison dropped his head into his hands. My client invokes his Fifth Amendment right and will make no further statements. But it was too late. Dylan had confessed. Not to murder exactly, but to something just as damning, creating the conditions for his father's death and hoping nature would take its course. D.A. Thornton looked at Torres. That's enough for charges. Reckless endangerment resulting in death, elder fraud, forgery, filing a false police report. Mr. Mosley Braun, you're under arrest. I watched as they read Dylan his rights, as they led him away in handcuffs. He looked back at me once, his face a mixture of rage and something that might have been grief. I couldn't tell if he was grieving for himself or for the relationship we'd once had. Patricia was arrested that afternoon. The evidence of her involvement was overwhelming. Emails between her and Dylan discussing Gerald's medications, research on her computer about drug interactions, the fraudulent medical assessment she'd provided. She'd thought she was helping her husband save their family. Instead, she'd helped him commit murder. The trial took 8 months to prepare and 4 weeks to conduct. The jury found Dylan guilty on all counts except premeditated murder. Torres had been right that the evidence wasn't quite strong enough for that. But reckless endangerment causing death carried a 20-year sentence. Combined with the fraud charges, Dylan would spend at least 15 years in prison before being eligible for parole. Patricia received 10 years for her role as an accessory. I didn't attend the sentencing. Jennifer represented me, read a victim impact statement I'd written. I couldn't bring myself to sit in that courtroom and watch my son be sent to prison, even though I knew it was justice. Instead, I was at home. My real home. The farmhouse Gerald and I had built our life in. All the properties had been returned to my name. The forged documents were voided. My estate was mine again, fully and legally. The house felt different now, quieter. The ghosts were still there, Gerald in his workshop, Dylan as a child running through these rooms, but they felt more distant, like photographs fading with time. Margaret came by the day after the sentencing. She stood on my porch, tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. Dylan called me that day and said you'd had a breakdown, that you were having delusions, that you might hurt yourself. I was terrified. I thought sending you to the cabin where he could find you was the right thing." "I know," I said, because I did. Margaret hadn't betrayed me out of malice. She'd been manipulated, just like everyone else Dylan had touched. He's very good at making people believe him. "Can you forgive me?" I thought about it. Forgiveness was complicated when the betrayal had nearly destroyed you. But Margaret was also the person who'd driven me to that cabin, who'd given me the keys to escape when I needed them. Maybe she'd been manipulated, but she'd also, inadvertently, given me the tools to survive. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Give me time." She nodded, understanding. We weren't the same friends we'd been before all this, and maybe we never would be. But we were both trying, and that counted for something. The children, Emma and Lucas, were the hardest part. They'd lost both parents to prison, their grandmother to circumstances they were too young to fully understand. Social services had placed them with Patricia's sister temporarily. I'd requested visitation rights, and after careful evaluation, they'd been granted. Emma, now 9, was angry with me. She didn't understand why I'd put Daddy in jail. I didn't try to explain. She'd learn the truth when she was older, when she could process it. For now, I just showed up every week, brought cookies, played games, and let her be angry. Lucas, at 6, was more forgiving. He still called me Grandma, still hugged me when I arrived. He asked once if Daddy had done something bad. I told him that Daddy had made some very poor choices and now had to face the consequences. He seemed to accept that. Maybe in time they'd both understand. Or maybe they'd hate me forever for destroying their family. I had to accept both possibilities. The farm became my sanctuary. I planted a garden in the spring, a memorial garden for Gerald with roses and lavender. I spent my mornings there, talking to him the way I had when he was alive, telling him about the life we'd built and protected. Catherine Mills, the journalist who'd broken the story, wrote a follow-up piece about elder financial abuse and how my case had exposed systemic problems in how the legal and medical communities handle competency claims. Because of the publicity, Vermont passed new legislation requiring independent psychiatric evaluation before any elderly person could be declared incompetent. Other states were considering similar laws. My case had mattered. My fight had changed things for other people who might have suffered the same fate. That gave me purpose when the grief threatened to overwhelm me. 1 year after the trial, I stood in my kitchen watching cardinals fight over the feeder. The same view I'd had the morning Dylan had called to arrange that fateful meeting with Marcus Whitfield. But I was different now. Stronger. Clearer about who I was and what I was capable of. I'd survived my own son's attempt to erase me. I'd outsmarted a plan 2 years in the making. I'd proven that age wasn't weakness, that lived experience and intelligence could triumph over youth and arrogance. The estate was mine, managed now by professionals I'd hired and vetted carefully. The investments were sound. The properties were maintained. I'd even started a foundation in Gerald's name to help other elderly people fight financial abuse by family members. On the anniversary of Gerald's death, I scattered the last of his ashes. I'd kept some back, unable to let go completely, in the memorial garden. I told him about everything that had happened, about how I'd fought for us both, about how his letter had saved me. "You tried to warn me," I whispered to the wind. "You tried to protect me, even after death. I hope you know it worked. I hope you're proud of what I became." A cardinal landed on the feeder, brilliant red against the gray March sky. It looked at me for a long moment, then flew away. I stood there until the cold drove me inside, until the sun set behind the mountains, until the darkness came and I was ready to face it without fear. Because I'd learned something through all of this. something that would stay with me for whatever years I had left. The most dangerous thing anyone can do is underestimate a woman who's lived long enough to know exactly who she is and what she's worth. Dylan had made that mistake. He'd seen an elderly mother, easy to manipulate, easy to erase. He'd failed to see a fighter, and that failure had cost him everything. I went inside my house, my home, my sanctuary, my hard-won victory, and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow I'd visit the grandchildren. Tomorrow I'd work in the garden. Tomorrow I'd continue building the life I'd fought so hard to keep. But tonight, I simply stood in Gerald's workshop, running my hands over the furniture he'd built with such care and patience, and let myself feel the weight of everything I'd survived. I was 64 years old. I was alone. I'd lost my son, damaged my grandchildren's lives, been betrayed by people I trusted, but I was still here, still standing, still fighting. And that, I'd learned, was its own kind of victory. The kind that comes not from force or wealth or luck, but from the quiet, stubborn refusal to be erased by anyone, even family, especially family. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.